There's two reasons why I vote pro. Number one, legality. Number two, efficacy. Number one, legality. There was support for the idea that, hey, rights to be infringed upon us from Saudi Arabia, supporting the U.S. Constitution. It's irrelevant to our United States ground. We don't see how it applies. It's a good reality right now. States do have laws criminalizing cycle. Do so within legal boundaries, very beneficially defined in a tight way as possible, so they don't infringe upon free rights. Bad laws are bad laws, to the point where proving good laws are good laws and they exist right now. All my opponent's arguments are eventually irrelevant because we tell you do not have the right to use words as projectiles. We have the Supreme Court case, more recent than theirs, therefore our state precedent against theirs. Furthermore, Virginia F. Black is realizing you're not allowed to use words to intimidate another individual. At that point there, the freedom of speech is not absolute. Furthermore, you cannot base this entire round on constitutionality. My opponents tell you you should base it off constitutionality to the point where the Constitution originally had 3/5 of African Americans being considered a white man. That's irrelevant. They throw it out. The Constitution is a living document, is constantly evolving. At that point, the second issue why you vote pro is, furthermore, that there are other responses to the idea of the Tinker Standard. They say that if people have lower GPA, all of a sudden schools are allowed to interfere. Number one, they won't because they're afraid of litigation. Number two, it causes substantial interference. They leave that key word in the definition under the Tinker Standard, meaning schools won't interfere, they can, and they never will. At that point, it's irrelevant, won't help. We're giving you the only possible way to deal with this. Furthermore, when it occurs outside of school, how can the Tinker Standard cover that? You need laws criminalizing it. It's the only possible way to solve this problem. They're not really hurt feelings to the point where it rises to a hostile environment, physical, or like essentially like destroying an individual's life. It's really not necessarily just hurt feelings, my point, so ostensibly claim. Second issue why you vote for us is this idea of efficacy. In Missouri, within 3 months, we saw 7 prosecutions. Clearly, we were applying it correctly, we're doing it in a legitimate manner, and these were brutal cyberbullying cases, at which point we protect the victim. At that point, we're reducing harm, giving you a net benefit required from today's round. There are 2 reasons essentially why we allow this benefit to happen. Number one, you're allowed to go to the police. School's inefficient. Parents can't do anything if it's a response to another student. That's irrelevant. Once again, throw that out of today's round. The point where we're giving you the only possible way to deal with it. The Iowa State University study telling you that individuals will now go to the police because they have a legitimate measure. At that point, I usually to affirm. Now, if you give one non-specific evidence that how criminalizing activity doesn't reduce, it's not prevalent, that's just ridiculous. We give you other studies telling you that 47% of individuals would stop doing so otherwise. Therefore, I usually to affirm.
Okay, talk about the empirical success of the Missouri prosecutions, correct? Well, let me get you to respond to this. I don't think this can be a better example of how something could be arbitrary, because under those prosecutions, ex-girlfriends were prosecuting their ex-boyfriends for saying mean things to them in text, which is a specific example of prosecution. So why does that not demonstrate how entirely arbitrary it is if it's just vindictively used by ex-girlfriends?
Do you have one in front of you right now?
No, I have the actual descriptions of the cases.
I see. I knew they were incredibly violent, threatening her essentially, but not necessarily threatening her to a large extent, which is that
basically, the cases were extreme cases of cyberbullying that necessitated. But overall, would you agree that constitutionality is not, in and of itself, sufficient to use?
No, of course not. But what we're using constitutionality for and Supreme Court cases for is to actually show you some sort of metric of justice. And what is your metric of what is most just? You don't have one, do you?
We're reducing cyberbullying, helping individuals live their better lives.
Okay, at what cost, though? If you're going to criminalize 6 million Americans,
yeah, what cost?
Okay, criminalize that, right? So how many has over-criminalization actually occurred?
No, because
so it's not
cyberbullying is not illegal.
So do you agree that every single impact you have is entirely hypothetical?
No, I mean not at all. Because
it's happening in Missouri, it's happening in Iowa, it's happening in all these areas.
You have first of all, you have no Supreme Court precedent to back up that is not happening for one thing. Like you have to show me that it's gone to the Supreme Court and been verified as being legal in order to say that you're supported by the Constitution.
You're basically not. Alright, so let's talk like you're like vagueness or alright, sorry, your free speech.
I mean, if you could respond to that.
Right, yeah, we're responding to free speech.
Alright, so your free speech argument. Is it productive as the court ruled? Is it when words are used as projectiles? Is an exchange of use?
Well, that's completely constitutionally protected.
Wait,
2002, why are the Ocean Court School District, where it's based the mere fact that a statement and cause
it is not plausible to
express
uphold the right to use words as projectiles when no exchange of use is involved.
This case is making up in the Supreme Court, allowing us to eventually get this.
Wait, what case? When was this? What Supreme Court case?
They're probably based on Virginia being allowed.
They're probably? Is it a Supreme Court case?
Yeah, it's a precedent that you cited.
It's not a Supreme Court case.
Your argument is probably going to use your precedent. Why can't we show you another one?
Because yours isn't a Supreme Court case.
Wait,
I mean, no, like what year is it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know the year. But
okay, well then it doesn't matter.
You don't know what precedent
This was in the 1990s.
Okay, the 90s.
Alright, this was in the 1990s. If you want to talk dates, hold on. If you want to talk dates, this is 1990.
Why are you talking about school
Okay, fine. 1990. Look at 1997. The Communications Decency Act was struck down for vagueness.
And here's one filed March 15, 2010. A state may punish those words by the very items. Essentially,
I don't even see the argument.
It's filed. Alright,
fine. Let's debate the argument.
Why does that matter?
Back and forth.
Alright, if I say that you are really bad at debating, is that productive?
I mean,
Is cyberbullying legitimate? Is cyberbullying legitimate?
All right, are my judges ready? Opponents? Partner? What this round comes down to is which side provides you the most justice. And I think it's been pretty obvious that Connor's done so to this point. First of all, if you look at like the entire point of like free speech rights in the United States, is because what we want to do is we want to create a society in which you can have political discourse, in which they can say, yeah, you're a bad debate team. We can actually argue about that, where you're actually able to criticize politicians like Tiger Woods, for instance. Basically, what my opponents have done with their vague and broad definition of saying that if it classifies as harm, it's not constitutionally protected. That means that basically what they've done is they've violated the basic principles set down in Brandenburg v. Ohio and Dwyer v. Ocean Ford School District in 2002, which said the mere fact that a statement causes hurt feelings does not render this expression unprotected. Not to mention that they're also violating Reno v. ACLU in 1997, which said the specificity is required to regulate the internet. Because they don't ever define for you what a harm is, they never show you that it's even going to ever be able to be prosecuted. Because the fact is that their definition of harm is far too broad, and so because they never provide one. Now, also my opponents keep on saying we need to be a criminal offense because the Tinker loophole isn't big enough. Well, basically the Tinker loophole is basically to allow schools to regulate some free speech inside of the schoolhouse gate. The Tinker is a lot broader than the normal free speech rights that you're normally given. The fact is they're completely violating what your normal day-to-day free speech rights should be because Tinker sets a precedent allowing schools to monitor free speech inside the school. Also, they completely ignore our impact of how like physical bullying has decreased while cyberbullying has increased because you've just moved the venue of where people are talking with each other, and they completely ignore the fact that you'd much rather have someone say something mean about you online than punch you in the face. And so then move on to our chilling effect point. They say, oh, that's Saudi Arabia, don't worry about it. But the fact is that Saudi Arabia is a completely legitimate example of a state in which their free speech rights are simply not protected. And the direct result of that is people are afraid to speak out. And if people are afraid to speak out in the United States, our entire system crumbles down around our ears. When you have a democracy, it is entirely hinged upon the ability to criticize your public officials. Now, they keep on providing like these random examples that aren't constitutionally tested, therefore you must throw them out in this round. Thank you.
The real world refutes my opponent's own case, and thus I urge you to affirm today's resolution. As they agree to and crossword, the constitutionality argument is not sufficient for you to negate today's resolution, but here's why that flows to our side anyway. What we're saying is that the free speech argument hasn't been entirely refuted. They try and extend this point by completely ignoring our refutations on it. We're saying that, look, free speech is only protected when you have an actual exchange of views taking place. Their only response is that, look, what was the data that my partner just read out of 2010 example? What we're saying is that you have to have an actual purpose with your free speech or rights. You have to have a purpose for your free speech for it to be protected. It's not an absolute right, but it's rather a proportional one. No response to that point, extend that response through. Then the whole vagueness argument, they completely drop this point in today's round. This is the presumption through most of their points. Missouri, Idaho, Kansas, very specific legislation, very specific definitions that has not been responded to. Unless they can prove that current laws are vague and they haven't responded to the current real-world examples, then they're not proving their own point here. And lastly, their next major offensive point that they suddenly started to bring up was that we didn't have a definition of harm, but we always have a definition of harm. It's relatively obvious. The courts right now use a reasonable person standard, as we mentioned before, to define this basic harm argument. What we're seeing is that obviously we know that if a person kills himself, harm is seen. My partner gave you the example of when people are shot. That's clear harm. Suicides are harm. Lowering grades are harm. Alcohol and drug abuse, that's clear examples of harm. We give you that point. So at the end of this round, what you're left with is that the benefits that the pro provides, that they completely drop in today's round. The short-term benefits, they completely drop that point. Okay, is the short-term harms and the long-term benefits of today's round. They completely drop this point throughout this debate. The point is, if we vote pro in today's round, what we see is that in the short term, the police can come in here, meaning the long term, the whole deterrence argument. They drop their short, saying that 47% of people believe they would not be cyberbullying in the first place if it were simply for the whole idea of real legislation working. A pro-ballot achieves that, they completely drop that point. So because of the real-world analysis we give you and the simple fact that the Constitution is insufficient to negate, I urge you to